Hello, everybody. Welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast with me, James Dickson. Wishing you all a very good morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever or wherever you tune into today's podcast from. And by crikey, strike me down, it is the 7th of October. I was speaking to somebody on the phone this morning who works in the industry who saying much the same as me. How on earth are we already in October? I think this particular episode that we're recording today is probably going to go out towards the middle to the end of October. And yeah, this year has flown past. We say it every year, but I don't know what people think out there in this year in particular, but it really does seem to have rocketed. And I'm sure that our guest today, who works deep within the sort of the agency and the brand side of things and brand experiences within the industry, will probably attest to feeling exactly the same way. We're going to be joined today on the podcast by Louisa O'Connor. Louisa is the MD of Scene Presents. We're going to be talking today about cultural relevance, what that means, how it plays a part in brand experiences and brand events, brand activations, and in the wider events industry indeed. So let's bring our guest on for the first time to the Event Industry News podcast. Let's welcome Louisa O'Connor. Louisa, hello.
Hello. Nice to
Thanks.
see you.
Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us today. And I was just saying off air, it's great that Louisa, and I hope you don't mind me saying this, is a northerner, is a Yorkshire. It's from Yorkshire. It's where I live. It's where I've been for the last 26 years. It's my favourite place in the world. I love it. It's great to have a northerner on the show today, Louisa.
Oh, you've spoilt it now. I was gonna put a fake accent on, but I don't think I could do it now. It's pretty
No.
obvious I'm northern.
We've gone in opposite directions. You went north to south, and I've been here now for about the same period of time from south to north. No, but welcome to the podcast today, and thanks for taking a bit of time out to join us. As I said in the introduction, you are the managing director of Scene Presents. Before we get into the conversation about today's topic, tell us a little bit first of all, for context, about Scene Presents, what you do as a business.
Yeah, of course. So, Scene Presents, we are a brand experience agency. So, we design and produce brand activations for the likes of Netflix, TikTok. So, whether we're doing that for B2C or B2B audiences, I guess we're ideating on and designing brand spaces that people want to come and learn about the brand or learn about a product. So, yeah, that's us in a nutshell.
Fabulous. And when we talk about cultural relevance, it's something I mentioned in the introduction, and that's, loosely speaking, going to be the outline of today's topic of conversation. Um, let's do two things, if we may. Tell us, what a brand experience is. What the sort of the typical, if there is one, event might look like that you work in, because there will be people that listen to this podcast who don't necessarily work on the brand side of things, who may not have done a brand activation. They may work in the events industry, but in a maybe a different area. Let's do two things. Tell us a bit about what sort of brand activation and what an agency like you would do for a brand, and then what we mean by cultural relevance.
I feel like I've tried to explain this to my mom many times. What is a brand experience? What do I actually do? So, brand experiences, if a brand has got a new product that they want to launch, they've maybe got new services they want to talk about, or they actually just want to get their name out there and make people more aware of what they do, what they'll do is usually put on a space where people can come and feel immersed by that brand. So we work a lot with what we call intangible brands, so brands that you work with on your phone or on your
Mm.
screen. And how do you create that world so that if someone walks into a space, they're like, I'm inside Netflix, I'm inside TikTok, this is what it feels to be part of that brand. And I think in real life experiences do that, because you can scour the web and you can look on things and you can join things online, but that kind of resonance, that feeling, you don't really get that as much as you do when you come into a fully built out brand experience. So for me, it's about education, it's about stimulating emotion, and it's about really immersing someone in that product and that brand over and above what they could maybe find online about it.
Mm. And that's a whole other subject, I guess, in the terms of the challenge of trying to create that real life tangible experience and we use Netflix as an example for something that really, 99.9% of the world's users of Netflix will have only ever interacted with it digitally, either on their
Yeah.
TV or a mobile device. That's a challenge in its own right.
Yeah, exactly. That is a challenge. It's definitely a challenge this day and age with the expectations of like digital things online, people are so used to seeing things really quickly, and also things that are maybe out of this world. And when you have to try and bring that into a physical space and maybe do it on 1% of the budget, and, timelines that maybe don't coincide with what people think, that is a challenge. We've all maybe seen the things online of the Willy Wonka experience, but people are used
Yeah.
to seeing Willy Wonka online, right? You're used to seeing the chocolate fountain, the river, these amazing worlds that are built online. To then bring that into an in real life space and give it that wow factor, that impact, that what it creates in the kind of budgets that are associated with brand experiences and the timelines that are associated with brand experiences, that's a challenge for a lot of brands and a lot of agencies in turn.
Yeah, and that leads us into exploring what cultural relevance is nowadays with in terms of brand thing. How would you? Because I'll be honest here, I've never heard the term before. I was looking at the notes for today's podcast. I thought cultural relevance. And I thought I had to think about it, a bit of a ponder, and thought, what? How could I explain it, and how do I think, or what do I think it means?
Yeah.
Tell us your understanding of cultural relevance in this context.
So for me, on a base level, it's talkability. If you are culturally relevant, then people are talking about you. So if you think about the things outside of brands that we think about are culturally relevant, it's the things that when you go to a pub, that's what you're talking to your mates about. It's the things that you're sharing online. So for me, brands that are doing cultural relevance really well are the ones that are in your day-to-day kind of conversation. So Nike, Patagonia, Moncler, even through to like digital brands, TikTok, Netflix, Meta, they're
Mm.
all in the news, they're being talked about. And I think the reason why they're it's so hard to say that,
I know.
culturally relevant, is because they are relevant to their communities. Their users and communities look to them to inspire things. So either inspire what they do, what they see, or even look to them to educate them. And I think it's also about those brands help create a space so that they can be themselves.
Mm.
So for me, I think that's cultural relevance, is that it's make sure you're being talked about, but also make sure you're relevant to the people that are engaging with you so that you are adding value to their life on a day-to-day basis.
And again, I'm gonna stick with Netflix purely because I think it's
Mm.
so identifiable. And when you use the word culture alongside it, if I think about people's day to day lives, just even phrases like Netflix and chill,
Yeah,
that's become synonymous in social media language. Even the audio ident when you launch the Netflix app, the
the to-dum.
dudum,
The to-dum. Yeah, that is
it's
called the
so
to-dum.
you don't even need to see the brand anymore, do you? You don't even need to see the name
No.
Netflix and the logo. I would argue that most people who hear that would know instantly what that is and what it represents, in exactly the same way as the Apple audio icon when you boot up an Apple computer or device. Um, when you start to have a brand that then sits culturally alongside people's sort of day-to-day lives, does that make the job that you do then for them easier or difficult when you've got these sort of
Mm.
embedded cultural aspects that you could draw on?
I think it makes it there's a lot of rich content in there you can work with, but I think it's a lot of responsibility representing that accurately and in the right way outside of the digital sphere. But I think that's the beauty of, like, if we bring it back to brand experiences, I suppose, like, how are we trying to make brand experiences culturally relevant, and advise brands on how and when and where they show up to ensure that they stay that way.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of, the way that we start is you've got to look at the brand values of that brand. So like, what are they known for? What's the sphere that they
Mm.
play in, so that you ensure that you're not kind of showing up at brand experiences that then aren't relevant for them and aren't relevant for their communities, to ensure that they stay kind of within the realms of their values and what makes sense for them. And I think that's our responsibility, and making sure that we protect that for them, especially with brands that have such wide real estate of things that we could play with.
Mm. Yeah, and when I think about how things have changed and adapted, and you'll know far more about this than me, I'm throwing in maybe some real life experiences of what I think are relevant, and that is, when a product was launched even a decade ago, take a new food product, or makeup product. It was easy. You get a few people wearing branded t-shirts and caps in your town centre or in a local shopping
Yeah.
centre, and they're just basically handing out free samples to as many people as possible, hoping to get them into as many hands as possible. And as far as they were concerned, that was brand activation. We've stepped on massively now, haven't we? Because actually creating an environment in which they can enjoy that product is in itself creating then that cultural experience, isn't it? It's become so much more sophisticated in how a company wants to market a new product. They need to give people that environment that they're actually going to use the product in.
Yeah, and I think, there's, if we think about how brand experiences have developed, a few things have affected it. If we think even in most recently, the C word, COVID, I think a lot of things that happened during that time have affected how we show up with brand experiences, but maybe over a longer period of time, it's the technology advancement. So people now want things faster. They are spoiled with what they can get in their lives. They can get things at the drop of the hat. They can see things online that you wouldn't even believe. So I think there's two things in that brand experiences have evolved in that we have to be so much more innovative. People want more. Gone are the days where they'll sit in front of a flower wall and take a photograph. They want much, much more than that. They really want these brand worlds and experiences. If you think of some of the greatest things out there that people, attend, like even going back to Netflix, they're bringing some of their shows to life in real life spaces that you can go to. So I think there's that bit. I think there's that element that we've really had to up our game of how brand experiences speak to communities, speak to their cultural needs, speak to their individual needs, speak to things that they're interested in. But then I think the other side is the human side, in that during the COVID days when people couldn't have that human interaction and
Yeah.
everything digital blew up, now what we've seen is like this massive insurgence of people really want the human aspect. And I think with the likes of NFTs, metaverse, and now we're in the world of CGI, when, you look at things online and you're like, is that real? Is there a handbag floating down Oxford Street? I'm not sure, probably not. Like in real life, brand experiences are that one time where what you're seeing is real. And I think there's a lot of distrust out in the world. And for us, as agencies working with brands, creating brand experiences, the in real life aspect allows us to play with that brand world building, but also allows us to create that human interaction piece, which I think a lot of consumers really want now versus just online interactions.
Absolutely. And in terms of those interactions, and again bringing it back to cultural relevance and embedded culture, just again flicking through your website before we came on this recording today to have a look at some case studies, some examples, get a feel for the type of things you're working on. I looked at the Adidas Originals project, and the JD Sports, a new JD Sports that opened in Paris, and you had stuff projection mapped onto the Arc de Triomphe, and I look at something like that and how JD Sports as a brand has positioned themselves on the high street and as a retailer. 25, 30 years ago, a sports shop was a sports shop. You went in there, you bought trainers, tracksuits, football boots, etc. The way that JD have positioned themselves as effectively in such a competitive marketplace as a sports footwear brand, but one that is closely linked to fashion as well. Street fashion, streetwear, certain types of sport. It's not just a sports shop. It's effectively become a fashion retailer, hasn't it, that specializes in sports footwear.
Yeah, and it's a great example of how to do cultural relevance well in a couple of ways. So JD know their sweet spot. They know their audience. They're not trying to, appeal to someone like me, perhaps. They've got a really tight-knit community of diehard fans, and they put on experiences for them. They show up in spaces for them. But also what they do really well, which I think is one of the things that's massively important for a brand to be culturally relevant, is they put their community at the heart of what they do and their experiences.
Yeah.
So that example that you've mentioned, everyone that was in that campaign was a JD Adidas consumer. They were all about you make us who we are. We're going to create a campaign around you. So rather than it feeling fake, rather than it feeling like we're just going to show up for a moment in time, they really thought about the kind of legacy piece. They really thought about the consistency piece. They thought about what was important to their users, their community, their consumers, and they put them at the heart. And that's what makes them, and especially that campaign, culturally relevant, because it was authentic to them and it was authentic to their community. And I think that's a massive part of how you show up in a relevant way.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's interesting as well from a business point of view how yes, this helps with their marketing, their ongoing brand awareness, etc., etc. This is all done from a business point of view, but it's interesting when you look at companies like JD and how they position themselves and how they've adopted this clearly very proactive and forward-thinking way to their marketing, their brand strategies by engaging agencies like you to deliver these types of campaigns. And when you look at high street and brands, and particularly in the retail sector, brands that have fallen by the wayside because they haven't had the foresight or maybe haven't taken the advice where it's been given to adopt similar strategies. And really the type of thing we're talking about today is critical to any major brand now.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you have to be seen to be in tune with your community. I think that's the other bit of culture. Culture is, there's a few ways to look about this, like the age old argument: is culture created by brands, or do brands kind of hang on the coattails of culture that's already there? And who creates that culture? And in my
Mm.
head, I think that consumers create that. I think it depends what we're interested in, what's important to us at the time. And I think maybe some brands that I talked about at the start, they're not being talked about, so they don't have that talkability piece. Maybe brands that aren't in that sphere are not listening to their communities, and they're maybe only really focusing on what I would call macro trends. So when we think about culture, there's probably macro trends that are around all the time. So,
Yeah.
massive one is environment sustainability. It's never going to go away. It's been a trend for ages.
Mhm.
You as a brand need to make a decision. Are you authentic enough to show up in that space? Is
Yeah.
it true to kind of your values? But then there's these micro trends, and I think brands that stay on top of things and stay in your kind of talkability piece, they get on those micro trends and they do it really quickly. So a
Mm.
micro trend recently has been like nostalgia. So if you think of Pepsi, they did an amazing
Yeah.
pop-up corner shops. They really tapped into that nostalgia piece, but they did it quickly
Yeah.
because nostalgia's almost going away. It's like it's a bit been there, done that. And I think some of these maybe bigger brands that can't pivot and adapt quickly, who can't see a trend emerge and then go, okay, let's change our strategy, let's do XYZ, they maybe fall behind some of the other brands who can have that flexibility and really embrace it when some of these micro trends come along, so that they are in that talkability piece with their communities because it's what they're talking about at that time.
Mm. And nostalgia is one of those things where, and again, the next sort of example that I was going to throw at you, it falls into what I'm about to say, which is the fine balance that you've got to strike when you're delivering something for a client, where you don't want to appear to be jumping on a bandwagon. You
Yeah.
don't want people looking in on that, looking and saying, "Oh, well, they're just jumping on a bandwagon there." And the next one that I'd referenced and that I'd noted before we came on the recording today was again from your website, was the Microsoft Pride
Yeah.
float at London's Pride Parade. And
Hmm.
on the face of it, you would look at it, and I'm sure a lot of people would look at it and go, "Well, Microsoft, why would
Yeah.
they want to participate in London Pride and parade and have a float and everything?" And again, is there that risk, being brutal, that they could look like they're jumping literally on a bandwagon? And if you've got to really execute that carefully to maintain their own brand, but also tie it in with the relevance of the actual event itself.
Absolutely, but I think you've got to be led by the actual community within your showing up. So with something like that, we seek advice from people from that community.
Of course, yeah.
Now, Microsoft in particular has a huge Gleam community, which is their internal team that supports the LGBTQ plus community, and they do loads and loads of work. So for them, it was very authentic. They absolutely had a space within that, but there are brands that maybe don't. And even as an agency ourselves, we have to be careful.
Mm.
There are agencies out there that, are particularly well versed in that area. And I just think my whole thing is you've got to be consistent. So I think if Microsoft just turned up once a year, did a pretty float at Pride, never talked about it again, and didn't do anything else, and awful. But they have a huge program of events that they do all
Yeah.
year. They have loads of internal, programs and systems, and that's just a chance for them to celebrate and be part of the festival. So I think the key for any brand, whether it's Black History Month, whether it's, I don't know, Environment Day,
Yeah.
Women's Day, anything that you decide to show up at, which is generally like a cultural day, you need to figure out, first of all, is it true to our values? Do we have a voice within this space? And then you need to ensure that you're consistent. Don't just
Yeah.
drop in and then drop out again and never appear again, because your community will call you out for sure.
That's great advice, not just for clients that you'll be working with, but for people listening to this who are, working on any event, or get an inquiry from a client saying, "Can you help us deliver X, Y, and Z project?" Is to have that sort of longevity and that backup. There's probably nothing worse than somebody sees a company at an event of any description and then thinks, "Oh, great, they're participating in that. Oh, they must support it," and they go and search for them. They look at their website, they looked at their socials, and there's nothing about it at all apart from on the day, and then that's it. Like you
Exactly.
said, it's too easy now to get found out as an organization. So if you're going to undertake maybe a one or two multi-day activation and an in-person event, the business has got to be geared up to sort of support that all year round.
Yeah, definitely. And I also think, don't be afraid. Don't think that you have to do everything. Like, do less well. There's lots of things out there culturally that you can be part of as a brand, and not
Mm,
everything will fit. If we think of some of the great brands out there that people respect a lot, so Patagonia is a great example.
yeah.
They obviously have unbelievable policies around the environment and the planet, and they can really back those up. So they have a legitimate voice to show up in that space. If your company doesn't, then my advice is don't. There's something else. There will be something else in your values that you maybe have a better space in to talk about and champion, and don't feel like you have to spread yourself thin, and just because a day is happening you have to comment on it or talk about it.
Yeah, and it's in terms of sort of wider comment and wider audience reach. Again, the TikTok Eurovision thing that you did, I was looking at that, and I found that brilliant because I don't know if people are aware of sort of TikTok's involvement in the last Eurovision, but it was the first. I'm sure it was the first time that a social media sort of company and brand of that level had been involved as a sort of a direct partner of an event like that. And I'm not sure exactly what this sort of the official title was, but TikTok were in some respects a broadcast partner, weren't they, of Eurovision, and which gave them all sorts of opportunities for activation in Liverpool. There were live music events, but again, if you look at Eurovision itself as a brand and its cultural impact and what it represents, it is broad, it's far reaching.
Mhm.
If you think back to acts, over the years, and the different elements of society that they represent, it's always been in itself a very inclusive and open forum for people to come and play music, regardless of what type it is or what background they're from. And I guess that ties in with a lot of the sort of the activations and a lot of the stuff that we've talked about already.
Yeah, I think TikTok are very strategic about what they support, but that partnership was all about celebrating individualism and celebrating different talents. So what
Yeah.
they wanted to do was create a space for performers and artists of Liverpool to come along and enjoy the event that was going on and taking over their city, but also share their musical skills. So we basically built a load of busking sites. They could go live on TikTok. It was a real, TikTok is all about we will give you a platform to share your passions and share what you're interested in and share your talents in, maybe because you've not been able to do that
Mm.
before, and you're doing it in quite an authentic, unedited, unfiltered way.
Yeah.
And I think, I'm not a Eurovision expert, but that's definitely the sense that I get of Eurovision when I've been watching it, in that this is a
Yeah.
celebration of almost like anything goes. So I think
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that, again, if you think about cultural relevance, it has to make sense. It has to feel like, you have to feel like a consumer, not watching it and going, eh? this partnership, what, like, and there's been a few brands that have been called out on it before. There was a luxury brand, let's say, that did a Greasy Spoon cafe pop up that got quite a lot of backlash about, like, you're selling things that the average working class person can't afford, and you're kind of taking something that's quite intrinsic to them and working class and putting your brand all over it. I don't get it. Like, I
Yeah.
get you're working on the nostalgia thing, you're working on the kind of like
Mm.
going back to your roots thing, but does that make sense for your brand? And who am I to police brand experiences? It looked cool, it was cool, but I just think communities now are very switched on, especially Gen Z. A lot of brands are trying to advertise to or attract Gen Z, and they are savvy. Like,
Yeah.
they will have no fear of calling you out and calling you out for something that they don't agree with. And I think we have to do our due diligence and make sure that if we're doing something, we've kind of got a really good reason behind it, and then it makes sense.
I've got two Gen Z children, and they are, when you say savvy, they're brutal sometimes as well
Mm,
in their
Terrifying.
condemnation of things, in their opinion. That they're not afraid to express their
Nope.
opinions. They will give you their assessment on something with uninvited sometimes, which is good and bad. But I can completely attest to what you're saying there, and to a lot of these brands that we've talked about today, they represent a really big demographic in terms of their audience. Netflix, TikTok, and JD. Just those three straight away, I can tell you both my boys will be absolutely all over those. They'll know what they are. They'll be in and out the shops. They'll know TikTok. They've got access to all of those, and it's again, that's an interesting one in how we break down and how brands, from a cultural point of view, break down their demographics now into categories,
Yeah.
because it's, again, the metrics and looking at the data and the statistics is so important. And I'm guessing that will, in some respects, shape some of the activations that you do and some of the events that you do for brands. They
Yeah.
may come to you and say, look, on this one, we actually want to go after a specific demographic. Does that happen?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Because I think brands are becoming savvy to the fact that you can't please everyone all the time.
Yeah.
And if you're trying to, it's probably not going to go that well. I think you've got to really think about who you're trying to target. A lot of people listening might have to put on experiences for B2B clients, so they're going business to business. That's a whole other niche. And if you're doing a consumer, we need another podcast, but we've not even gone on to Gen Alpha. Like, creating something for Gen Alpha versus Gen Z versus millennials, that they've got completely different ways of consuming information and ways in which they think about a brand. So it's better to try and think about, particularly with this brand activation, who are we trying to engage, who are we trying to target, and then tailor, your activations and your brand experiences around that. Otherwise, you're likely to not hit the mark for at least a few people.
You're right about the other topics. I mean, that's a whole other podcast talking about,
Oh, it's wild. Gen
breaking down the
Alpha is
demographics into the generations, and even within that, when I look at Gen Z, and I've just quickly, Googled it now. I know for a fact both my boys are in there, but it's people born between 97 and 2012, and
Not that
mine.
long ago.
No, and but the sort of the cultural, educational differences, the lifestyle, and the tech that they've grown up with from minute one, is totally different to kids who are born even 5 or 6 years before that sort of 97 cutoff.
Mm.
It's strange how we can break down generations, but I guess because of the way technology has moved on, that's ultimately as well shaped how we can define generations now, is when we can look back, and there'll be a generational divide just on the year that the iPhone was launched.
Yeah. No,
It's
exactly.
bonkers.
Yeah, and it affects the way we do, and I think there's probably different ways to look at this, but I do think the newer generations are used to seeing things that are a little bit more amazing than maybe even my generation was used to. So we have to up our game even more. If you think about the experiences that are popping up at places like Coachella,
Yeah.
versus when we were going to festivals and you'd have like a silent disco and a ball pit and think it was the best thing you've ever seen. So I think,
Yeah.
now that they consume so much all the time. Our CGI was Jurassic Park, and now you watch Jurassic Park and you're like, oh my god, I
Yeah.
actually
It
thought
looks
that
like a
was
fake
good.
dinosaur walking
Yeah,
through
I
a
was
fake
like, I thought
landscape.
that was good. That's really quite sad. But now if you think about what they're used to seeing, and then they come to an in real life experience and they want that same feeling. So as brands and agencies, that's why we've got to really think about how and where we show up, so that we can show up in a really effective, tangible, and a way that will really resonate with people that come, and they won't think that this isn't quite hitting the mark, and I wish I'd have just watched it online.
Well, that's the final point to make, really, is that I think what you were saying there is that people are so quick to make a judgment now because of the way we consume media. We consume it quickly and we make judgment really quickly, particularly in Gen Z. I think that there's a particular relevance there. And if you do an activation that doesn't hit the mark immediately, people will either see through it or they'll walk on past it, wherever it may be. It can be, they can work spectacularly well, but I guess they can probably fail really, really quickly if you don't hit the mark accurately.
Yeah, and that's that's the edgy seat of being in this industry as an agency or brand side. But I think the only thing we can do is, I'm a massive believer, maybe it's my northern roots, but massive believer in honesty. I think you've just got to be honest about what you can achieve for the budget you've got and the time you've got. And I probably shouldn't say this as an agency, but do less well. Like,
Yeah.
think about something, think about who you're trying to engage, what do you want to get out of the experience, and then do that well. And instead of doing, I think people think that to get the measurement piece right, to get this ROI, that everyone's got ROI looming over them like a black cloud.
Yeah.
How,
All right.
I've got to do loads and loads of events so that I can get the ROI. I think, don't think about it like that. Even if you do one event really, really well, your ROI comes from lots of places. It comes about the talkability before the event. So, think about it as an integrated campaign. Put it out in the world before, who's talking about your brand? I want to go, you going? No, I don't know. I can't get a ticket, can I? Then you've got, the measurement when you're at the experience. What are they engaging with? What are they posting? What are they sharing? What's the feedback they're giving you? And then you've got the ROI after the event. A lot of the brands that we work with is like, look at your sales before and after an event. Look at how many times your brand's been mentioned in social media or on press before and after the event. Events aren't just about the ROI you get there and then. It's much, much broader and longer than that. And you've got to think about it before and after,
Yeah.
versus just thinking I've got to get 10,000 people through the door and I've got to do 25 events a year. Otherwise, I'm not going to get the ROI. I mean, I would love it if you did that, as long as you've got the investment and the budget to do it really well, and
Mm.
you're showing up in spaces that really make sense for you. And I've probably just done myself out of a job, but it is what it
No,
is.
no. I mean, the honesty thing. It's the old adage of, don't, was it, overpromise and underdeliver. It's do the opposite. Sometimes people, if somebody expects too much from what they're actually committing, either budget wise or from an expectation point of view, or in terms of how broad a demographic they're looking to target, better to actually be honest with them up front and say to them, look,
Mm,
I think you're actually expecting a little bit too much from this. Why don't we focus on this element? Why don't we focus on that element?
mm.
Break it down into smaller elements and deliver those, rather than saying, yeah, we can do that. We can deliver you an event that captures 18 to 65-year-olds and everything in between. Often it just won't work, again, given what we've
No,
spoken about some of the obvious generational divides that exist nowadays,
you've got to
especially
think
when
about
big brands are
it.
concerned.
Yeah, absolutely. You've got to think about it different to a digital campaign. For me, the in real life stuff is all about the human aspect. You're not going to
Mm,
be able to match that on a digital piece. That chat, that human interaction, that resonance they get from engaging with your brand in a really tactile way. I personally believe, and stats show, that you can't replicate that online.
yeah.
So I think you've got to think about your measurement piece slightly differently for brand experiences. Otherwise, you're never going to hit it. You're never going to hit those expectations of ROI for an in real life experience versus a digital campaign that can go out to millions of people. They're totally different. But I think there's huge value in that human piece, especially this day and age when there's so much distrust out there, and if you think about the brands that are investing in that, like Pinterest, for example, they've seen huge results from doing really tactile, tangible, in real life experiences. And if it works for them, then I think it can work for a lot of other brands too.
Absolutely. We've been talking today on the Event Industry Podcast to Louisa O'Connor, who is the Managing Director of Scene Presents. We've referenced some of the projects on the podcast today and some of the bits and pieces that I took from their website before today's recording. So I would definitely encourage anybody listening today to go and have a look, because you've got loads of case studies on there, haven't you? And let's leave it to you to tell people where to go if people want to find out a little bit more, Louisa.
Yeah, sure. So our website is www.scenepresents.com. Scene is spelled SEEN. Not only our work, but we have a section on there called Seen and Heard, where we put a lot of our insights on there. So we're always looking at the industry and what's going on out there. So if you want any further reading, have a look. And if anyone wants to follow up, you can always hit me up. Our email is on our website too. But I've loved today. It's been I could talk about our industry for hours on end. So well done you keeping it to this short.
No problem at all. And thanks very much for being a great guest. It's always good when the conversation flows easily and naturally, and the time just sort of runs past. And I look at the clock and think, oh crikey, where are we now? 37 minutes in today's episode, which is brilliant. Thanks for joining us. And just a couple of little mentions before we wrap up and end today's episode. If you are working in the events industry, which you will be doing, listen to this, and you want a supplier or a service within the industry, the chances are you'll find it over on eventindustrynews.com within the A to Z supplier directory. So please do go and have a little check out on the website. Whilst you're there, you can check out the latest news features, special supplements that Event Industry News and all the team there are producing and putting together. A mention as well, because we're now in October, which means that Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live, I can now say, are next month, which is bonkers that I'm saying that. But Event Tech Live and Event Sustainability Live return to Excel London next month in November. Co-located next to each other. If you register for Event Tech Live, you will get access to Event Sustainability Live and all the content and exhibitors in there, and vice versa. So visit one or both of those websites, eventtechlive.com or eventsustainabilitylive.com, where registration is now open for free. So go and register for those events that take place at Excel London next month. And I think the full conference schedule for both of those events is now available on both of those websites as well. So you can check out all of the conference content that's taking place across 7 stages, which brings us nicely to the end of today's episode. My thanks once again to today's guest, Louisa O'Connor from Scene Presents, and we'll see you on the next issue of the Event Industry News podcast. Thanks very much, everybody.